Sometimes the smallest voice can shatter the loudest silence, and the moment you choose to listen, a life is saved. If you love stories of courage, healing, and second chances, hit subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this journey. The wind had the bite of an early Oregon winter, the kind that crawled through seams of a uniform no matter how many layers you wore. Lieutenant Ethan Cole had learned to read the moods of weather almost as well as the instincts of his K-9 partner. Out here, both could save your life. Highway 26 cut through the pine forests like a strip of worn ribbon, its asphalt glazed in silver frost. Traffic was sparse this late in the afternoon. Ethan sat behind the wheel of his patrol SUV, one gloved hand resting on the gearshift, the other absently scratching behind Ranger's ear. Ranger, a broad-shouldered German shepherd with graying whiskers, lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked forward, his gaze locked on something beyond the passenger window. "What is it, boy?" Ethan's voice dropped into that calm, military tone he'd carried back from Afghanistan. The shepherd gave a low, rumbling growl, not the kind meant to intimidate, but the kind that said something's wrong. Ethan followed the dog's stare to the roadside ahead. At first, it looked like a bundle of laundry caught on a sagebrush. Then it moved. Ethan's pulse spiked. He slowed, pulled onto the gravel shoulder, and killed the engine. The sharp cold hit him the second he opened the door, along with the faint, metallic scent of snow in the air. Ranger leapt down beside him, tail stiff, nose working the wind. The figure resolved into a child. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, barefoot in the brittle grass. Her thin arms hugged herself tightly under a tattered dress the color of wilted daisies. Her hair was tangled, the strands sticking to her tear-wet cheeks. Ethan approached slowly, crouching to get to her level. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "My name's Ethan. This is Ranger. You're safe now." Her eyes, wide and the color of storm clouds, darted to the dog, then back to him. She opened her mouth, but only a trembling breath came out. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Is someone with you?" Her lips moved again, this time forming words so faint he almost missed them. "He's going to kill my mommy." The air seemed to still. Ethan felt those words like a live wire under his skin. Ranger pressed closer to the child, sniffing, then glancing at Ethan as if to say, "We need to move." Ethan's training roared to the front of his mind, the procedures, the urgency, the stakes. But there was also something more personal. A memory. Dust. Blood. The desert in 2012, when he'd once arrived too late. Not this time. He shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. "You're coming with me," he said firmly, tucking her under his arm while giving Ranger the silent hand signal to stay alert. As they reached the patrol SUV, she clutched his sleeve, her small hand like ice against the rough fabric. "Don't let him find me," she whispered. Ethan met her gaze. "Not while I'm breathing." Ranger barked once, short, sharp, like an oath, and the sound echoed down the empty stretch of Highway 26, marking the moment everything in Ethan Cole's life was about to change. The police station in Bend had the hum of tired fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee left too long on the warmer. Ethan pushed through the glass doors with Sophie, that was the name she'd murmured when asked, still bundled in his jacket. Ranger padded at his side, the pads of his paws soundless on the linoleum. The night duty sergeant glanced up from his desk, his brows knitting at the sight. "What have you got?" "Found her on 26, east of mile marker 42, Ethan replied. "Barefoot, underdressed, no adult nearby. She says someone's going to kill her mother." The sergeant's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't waste time with more questions. "Interview room 3. I'll call Linda." Linda Graves arrived within minutes. She moved with the kind of quiet precision Ethan had seen only in people who'd worked child protection for years, the balance between warmth and an unshakable core. She carried a fleece blanket and a soft plastic cup of apple juice, crouching to Sophie's level before she even said hello to Ethan. "Hi, Sophie," Linda said gently. "I'm Linda. My job is to make sure kids are safe. Is it okay if I sit with you for a bit?" Sophie's nod was so small it was almost invisible. Linda wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and offered the juice. The girl took it but didn't drink right away. While Linda coaxed small bits of trust from Sophie, Ethan stood in the corner, his arms folded, watching every flicker of expression on the child's face. She had the wary stillness of someone used to making herself small in dangerous rooms. It wasn't long before Linda's trained eye picked up what Ethan had already noticed: faint yellowing bruises along Sophie's forearms, and a newer, darker one peeking above the neckline of her dress. "Pattern bruising," Linda murmured to Ethan, her voice low enough not to carry. "See the parallel lines? Looks like a grab mark from an adult hand. And here," she indicated a crescent-shaped mark. "Could be from an object, maybe a belt buckle or door edge." Ethan's jaw tightened. So she's been through this before. Linda didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached for the art supplies a volunteer group kept stocked in the interview rooms: crayons, markers, sheets of paper. "Sophie, can you draw me something? Maybe your home or the people there?" For a moment, Sophie hesitated, then selected a dark green crayon. Her small hand moved in slow, deliberate lines. She drew a cabin with a crooked roof, then a tall figure beside it. A man, sketched in jagged strokes, his face obscured by an X. Beside him, she drew a woman with long brown hair, a smaller figure that could only be herself, and, to Ethan's surprise, a dog that looked suspiciously like Ranger. When she set the crayon down, Linda leaned in. "Sophie, who's this?" she asked, pointing to the X-faced man. Sophie's eyes flickered toward Ethan, then to the corner of the room as if checking for invisible ears. "He has a scar," she said finally, tracing her finger across her own cheek in a lightning bolt shape. "A scar on his face?" Linda clarified. Sophie nodded. "And the roof? It leaks in the middle when it rains. You can hear the drops in a bucket." Ethan's mind began to assemble the puzzle. Scar, leaky roof, isolated cabin. It wasn't much, but combined with her condition and the urgency in her earlier words, it was enough to form a starting point. Linda gave Sophie a reassuring smile. "Thank you for telling me that. You've helped us a lot." The girl slid the paper across the table toward Ethan. "The dog is Ranger," she whispered. Ethan crouched to meet her gaze. "Yeah, that's him," he said softly. "And now we're going to find your mom." Ranger let out a low whine, leaning closer to Sophie as if sensing her fear and lending her his steady warmth. In that small, quiet room, under buzzing lights and the shadow of unspoken threats, the first clear lead had emerged, not from an interrogation, not from force, but from a child's trembling hand drawing a world she wished she could leave behind. By dawn, frost clung to every pine needle in Deschutes National Forest, turning the dark green into a muted silver. Ethan stood beside his patrol SUV in the station lot, Ranger at his side, a folded piece of Sophie's small dress in his hand. The fabric still carried the faint scent of smoke, mildew, and something uniquely human, the trace that only a trained canine could parse from the chaos of forest air. Ethan crouched, holding it out to Ranger. "Find her," he said in the low, clipped tone that meant business. Ranger sniffed once, twice, then began pacing in a small, tight circle, nose low. His ears twitched, his tail stiffened. He looked up at Ethan with a sharp bark. He had the scent. Ethan had spent the night pulling every scrap of data he could: forestry maps, Bureau of Land Management records, even old hunting permits. He'd cross-referenced Sophie's description of a leaking roof with the GPS coordinates of unregistered structures. There weren't many, but there were enough to make time their enemy. The tech unit had also provided fresh satellite images. Ethan leaned over the hood of his SUV, tracing red circles over dense forest zones where trails faded into nothing. "These here," he muttered to himself, "don't show on official maps. That means abandoned cabins or illegal builds." Mark Alvarez from the U.S. Forest Service strode over, his jacket zipped to the throat. "Got your message. Heard about the kid. I'm in." Ethan nodded. "We've got a scent trail. If we combine it with the thermal anomalies from yesterday's satellite pass, we might narrow this down." Mark pulled out his tablet, overlaying Ethan's red circles with fresh imagery. 2 matches within 5 miles of each other. One's near an old logging road. The other, he tapped the screen, is deep enough you'd need to hike in. Ranger tugged lightly at the lead, his nose tilting toward the northern grid. Ethan exchanged a glance with Mark. "Guess we know which one's first." They drove as far as the SUV could take them, tires crunching over frozen ruts, before the road devolved into a narrow track swallowed by pines. Ethan let Ranger lead, the shepherd weaving through the undergrowth with purpose. The forest was quiet except for the muted drip of melting frost. Ranger's gait slowed, his nose brushing a fallen log, then skimming the icy dirt. He stopped suddenly, muscles coiled. Ethan followed his gaze. At first he saw only tangled brush and an old game trail. Then, a smudge of brown that didn't belong, a cabin, or what was left of one. Its walls leaned as if exhaustion had finally claimed them, the roof patched with mismatched sheets of tin. Ethan's boots crunched on something darker than frost at the threshold. He knelt. Blood. Not much. Just a smear on the weathered plank, but fresh enough to stand out against the grain. "Recent," Ethan murmured. Mark scanned the perimeter. No smoke, no fresh tracks. But if that's blood, someone was here not long ago. Ranger's nose hovered over the spot, his breathing quickening. He let out a low growl that resonated in the hollow air. Ethan's instincts tightened into a single point. The trail was real, and it was warm. Somewhere in this wilderness, Claire Harper was still alive, or had been within hours. He rose, meeting Ranger's steady gaze. "We keep going." The shepherd gave a single, silent nod, the kind only a handler could read, before turning toward the deeper forest, pulling Ethan toward the next clue. The pines thickened as Ethan and Mark pushed deeper into Deschutes National Forest. Here, the trees were older, their trunks wide enough to hide a man behind, the air damp with the scent of resin and decomposing leaves. Ranger moved ahead in measured bursts, nose to the ground, pausing, then surging forward again, like a living compass tethered to Ethan's gloved hand. Mark adjusted the strap of his rifle. This deep, it's either a hunter's lodge or someone who doesn't want to be found. Ethan didn't answer. His mind replayed Sophie's halting words. He has a scar. He'd seen that look in a child's eyes before, recognition wrapped in terror. It was never wrong. After a half hour of weaving through undergrowth, the forest began to thin into a clearing. There it was, a second cabin, bigger than the ruin they'd found earlier. Its roof sagged under a quilt of rotting pine needles, but there were recent boot prints in the mud outside, sharp-edged, heavy, made by someone carrying weight. Ethan raised a hand. Ranger froze instantly, his body dropping low. ears forward. Mark whispered, "You thinking someone's inside?" "Not sure," Ethan murmured, "but we'll clear it like there is." They approached in a low arc, staying to the cover of the pines until the last possible second. Ethan tried the door. Locked. Mark circled toward the back, checking for movement through the gaps in the warped boards. "Nothing," Mark reported. Ethan pulled a lockpick kit from his vest, habit from years of warrant work. 2 minutes later, the old latch clicked open and they stepped into the dim interior. The first thing that hit them was the smell, mildew, stale smoke, and something sharper underneath, the copper tang of blood. Sunlight leaked through a jagged hole in the roof, spotlighting a corner where rope lay in a coil, frayed at the ends. The floor beneath it was scuffed, as if someone had struggled there. Ethan's eyes swept the room. Against one wall, a stack of burlap sacks sat half-collapsed, their sides stiff with dried mud. A battered chair lay on its side, one leg splintered. On a warped shelf above the chair sat a photograph in a cracked frame. It was a woman, long brown hair, tired eyes, with a man whose face had been partly torn from the image, but not enough to hide the jagged, lightning-shaped scar running across his cheek. Claire Harper, Vince Dalton. Ethan's throat tightened. "Got something?" Mark called from near the window. He held up a single brown hair caught on a nail, long, with a tiny bead of dried red at one end. Ethan took the evidence bag from his kit, sliding the hair inside. "Blood's fresh enough she's still alive," he said. "But injured." Mark scanned the walls. "Whoever was here, they left in a hurry. No food supplies, no bedding. This place isn't the end point." Ethan looked down at Ranger, who had begun sniffing toward the back door, tail rigid. The dog let out a short, sharp bark, then looked back at Ethan expectantly. "Trail's still hot," Ethan said, straightening. "Let's move before it goes cold." They left the cabin as quietly as they'd entered, boots pressing into the same muddy tracks that would, if luck held, lead them straight to the man with the scar, and to Sophie's mother, before the forest swallowed her whole. The hum of the Bend Police Department's records room was nothing like the stillness of the forest. Here, the air smelled faintly of dust and copier toner, and the constant shuffle of paper underscored the urgency building in Ethan's chest. He stood at a terminal, eyes narrowing at the name that had surfaced on the screen. Claire Harper. Missing person report filed 18 months ago, later withdrawn. The reason for withdrawal: victim declined to pursue. Ethan didn't need a detective's badge to read between the lines. Victims didn't just walk away from cases like this. They were silenced. Across the table, records clerk Dana Miller pushed a manila folder toward him. "This is the full archive, Cole. Most of it's old, but you're going to want to see page 6. He flipped it open. There she was, Claire in a driver's license photo, hair neat, eyes bright. Below it, incident reports detailing prior calls to her residence, loud disturbances, suspected assault. Each time the suspect's name was the same: Vince Dalton. Ethan scrolled deeper into the digital file, pulling up Vince's military record. Discharged other than honorable. Prior service in Afghanistan. Different years than Ethan's deployment, but close enough to make the overlap sting. 2 assault convictions after discharge, 1 dropped for lack of witness cooperation. Mark Alvarez leaned over his shoulder. "This guy's a professional at disappearing. Knows the terrain, knows how to stay off grid, and if he's got Claire, he's not letting her go without a fight." Ethan's eyes flicked to a scanned complaint, Claire's sworn statement from 2 years ago. She'd reported Vince for choking her, threatening to put her in the ground where no one would find her. Weeks later, she withdrew the statement. The file noted credible death threats, but no charges filed. Linda Graves appeared in the doorway, holding a styrofoam cup. "Ethan, Sophie's still with our pediatric nurse. She's quiet, but she's eating." "I thought you should know." Ethan nodded, forcing his jaw to unclench. "Thanks. Keep her close." On the monitor, a map sprang to life as the tech unit fed in the latest data. "We've got something," a young analyst said. "Traffic cam on Route 20 picked up a red '99 Ford Explorer at 0417 this morning, registered to Vince Dalton, last known address in Madras, 2 occupants in the front, 1 matches Vince's build. Passenger was slumped toward the door. Could be your victim." Ethan stepped closer. Where was it headed? The analyst tapped a blinking arrow on the screen. "Northwest, toward Cascade Range. Past Sisters, you lose coverage. Cell service dies out past the tree line." Mark swore under his breath. That terrain is a nightmare. Dozens of old mining sites, unmarked trails. You could hide for months out there. Ethan studied the map, the winding roads, the gaps in coverage. He remembered the fresh blood on the cabin threshold, the hair with the bead of red. Claire was hurt. Moving her through terrain like that could kill her before they even caught up. "We're not letting that happen," Ethan said. "Push the last cam feed to my vehicle. Mark, get your gear. We roll now." Ranger, lying at Ethan's feet, lifted his head as if he understood. His ears pricked toward the door, ready. They didn't have much. A color, a model, a direction, but in the hands of someone who refused to quit. It was enough to turn a name on a file into a target in the crosshairs, and Ethan had no intention of missing. By late afternoon, the Cascade Range was cloaked in the cold blue shadow of oncoming evening. The temperature dropped fast here, and the wind carried the scent of snow even when the sky stayed clear. Ethan's SUV bumped along the rutted track, suspension groaning under the strain. Ranger sat alert in the back, ears swiveling with every change in the forest's cadence. Mark Alvarez rode shotgun, scanning the ridgelines with binoculars. "That traffic cam feed was 8 hours old," he said. "If they went off-road, we could be tracking in circles." Ethan kept his hand steady on the wheel. "Vince isn't wandering. He's headed somewhere he thinks no one can touch him." The radio crackled with static before the dispatcher's voice broke through. "Unit 12, we've got a call from a hunter in the lower Cascades. Says he saw smoke out near the abandoned Redding mine site. Said it didn't look like a campfire." Ethan's eyes sharpened. "Patch him through." A new voice came on, ragged with cold. "Name's Carl Jensen. Been hunting elk up there 20 years. This was thin gray smoke, like from a barrel or a stove, not a fire pit. And it was coming from a shack that wasn't there last season." Ethan pulled over, unfolded the topo map from the glove compartment, and marked the coordinates Carl relayed. "That's a half-mile from the old mine entrance," he said, glancing at Mark, "and completely off any service roads." Mark tapped the map. "Fits the profile. Hidden, out of sight, but close enough to the creek for water." Within the hour, they'd set up a portable drone on the hood of the SUV. The small craft lifted silently into the crisp air, its camera streaming real-time footage to Ethan's tablet. The forest unfolded below in a quilt of green and white. At first, nothing but tree canopy. Then, a break in the pines. "There," Mark pointed. The drone banked lower. Amid the clearing sat a small shack, its roof scorched black in one corner, smoke seeping through a patched metal flue. A battered SUV, matching the red Explorer from the traffic cam, was half hidden under a camo tarp behind the structure. Ethan adjusted the thermal overlay. 2 distinct heat signatures bloomed on the screen, one moving, pacing, possibly armed, and one stationary, slumped in what looked like a chair or cot. His jaw set. "That's a hostage," Mark's voice went low. It's her. Ethan keyed his radio to the tactical channel. Command, this is Cole. Confirm hostage situation. 2 occupants. Initiating hostage rescue protocol. Copy that, Cole. SWAT's rolling. ETA 40 minutes. Maintain visual. Ethan kept his eyes on the tablet. The pacing figure moved to a window, then back to the heat signature at the rear. He could almost feel Vince's paranoia radiating from the screen. Ranger let out a low growl from the back seat, as if he understood what they were looking at. Ethan turned, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. Not yet, partner, but soon. They stayed parked on a ridge overlooking the approach, the fading daylight bleeding into steel gray. Every minute felt like an hour, the knowledge of Claire's nearness taut in Ethan's chest. 40 minutes until backup. 40 minutes in which anything could happen inside that burnt shack. And in the quiet between the wind gusts, Ethan promised himself he wouldn't waste a second more than he had to. The first light over the Cascades was pale and brittle, spilling across the frost-bitten ground like a thin sheet of gold. Ethan crouched behind a fallen log on the ridge overlooking the burnt shack, Ranger pressed against his leg. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to have gone still. Through his earpiece, the SWAT commander's voice came low and steady. Cole, on your signal. They'd spent the night tightening the perimeter. Snipers positioned on 2 flanking ridges, entry teams staged along the eastern tree line. Ethan had studied the drone footage until the patterns inside were etched into his brain. Vince's pacing, Claire's stillness. Ranger's ears twitched. Ethan followed his gaze toward the shack. A shadow crossed one of the boarded windows. Vince, moving early. That wasn't in the pattern. Alpha team, Ethan whispered into the mic. He's up. Adjust timing. We go on my mark. He scanned the front, door secured with a crossbar, one window partially pried open. Perfect for distraction. Mark Alvarez, crouched 10 feet away, raised his hand, 3 fingers extended. Ethan nodded. 3, 2, 1. Now. The first flashbang went off at the side window, a searing burst of light and sound that shattered the morning stillness. Before the echo faded, Ethan was moving, Ranger at his heel, the SWAT team fanning wide. The shack door crashed open under a hydraulic ram. Inside, chaos. Vince Dalton had one arm locked around Claire's chest, the other pressing a hunting knife to her throat. His scar caught the flash of daylight like a jagged white slash. "Stay back!" he roared, dragging Claire toward the rear wall. Ethan's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Vince, drop it. It's over." But Vince's eyes were wild, not the eyes of a man about to surrender. Ethan gave the hand signal he'd prayed he wouldn't need. Engage. Ranger exploded forward, a streak of black and tan muscle. He hit Vince low, teeth clamping onto the man's forearm with crushing force. The knife clattered to the floor. Claire stumbled free, collapsing against the nearest SWAT officer. Vince howled, twisting, and in the chaos, his free hand slashed downward with a smaller blade pulled from his belt. Ranger yelped, a sharp gut punch sound, but didn't let go. Ethan was already there, wrenching Vince's arm back and driving him to the ground. 2 SWAT officers swarmed in, pinning the suspect, cuffing him before he could reach for anything else. "Clear!" someone shouted. Ethan dropped to one knee beside Ranger. Blood darkened the fur along the shepherd's side just above the flank. "Easy, boy," he murmured, pressing a hand to the wound. Ranger's eyes met his, steady despite the tremor in his body. Claire's voice shook from across the room. "Is he—" "He's going to be fine," Ethan said, more to Ranger than to her. "You're both going to be fine." Outside, the forest exhaled as the sun finally crested the ridge, spilling light over the scene. Vince Dalton shackled and glaring, Claire wrapped in a SWAT jacket, and Ranger lying with his head in Ethan's lap, his job done. It wasn't victory without cost, but it was victory. The emergency bay doors at St. Charles Medical Center swung open, spilling Ethan into the bright antiseptic light. His boots struck the tile in sharp, purposeful beats, Ranger cradled in his arms like the most precious cargo in the world. The shepherd's fur was sticky with blood, but his eyes were still alert, still tracking Ethan's face with that steady, unyielding trust. A trauma nurse rushed forward with a gurney. "We've got him. Let's go." Ethan eased Ranger onto the padded surface, keeping a hand on his flank until the vet techs from the K9 unit swept in, their motions fast but careful. "He's taken a blade to the side," Ethan told them. "Penetrating wound, flank, possible muscle tear." "We'll stabilize him," the tech assured. "He's a tough one." Ethan knew. Tough didn't even begin to cover it. But there was no time to linger. Down another hallway, Claire Harper was being wheeled into the ER, her face pale but her eyes searching. She spotted Ethan instantly. "Where's Sophie?" she rasped, trying to sit up. "She's safe," Ethan said firmly, stepping closer so she could hear. "She's at the station with child services. You'll see her soon." Claire's eyes brimmed, but she bit back the tears, as if afraid they'd undo her. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. An orderly ushered Ethan out so they could work. He paced the corridor outside, the smell of disinfectant thick in the air, his hands restless. The adrenaline that had carried him through the breach was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep fatigue and a gnawing need to see Sophie's fear replaced with relief. It took nearly 2 hours before Linda Graves arrived with the little girl in tow. Sophie's steps were tentative until she saw him. Then she broke into a run, her small arms wrapping tight around his waist. "Is Mommy here?" she asked, her voice small but urgent. "She is," Ethan said, crouching to meet her eyes. "And she's safe now. Want to see her?" Sophie nodded so hard her hair bounced. They walked together toward Claire's recovery room. The door was half open, the soft beep of monitors inside. Claire was propped against white pillows, her hair brushed back, a bandage at her temple. She looked fragile, but there was a light in her face when Sophie darted to her side. "Mommy!" Claire's arms opened wide, and Sophie climbed into them as if she'd never let go again. The sob that escaped Claire was quiet, but it carried every sleepless night, every whispered prayer. "We're safe now," she murmured into her daughter's hair. From the corner, Ethan saw Ranger lying on a blanket near the foot of the bed, his side wrapped in fresh bandages. One of the vet techs knelt beside him, offering a bowl of water. When Sophie noticed, she slid off the bed and padded over, crouching to stroke his head. "You saved Mommy," she told the dog solemnly. "And me, too." Ranger's tail thumped once, a slow, tired wag, before he rested his head in her lap. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, letting the scene settle in his chest. This was why they risked the cold, the bullets, the knives. Not for the reports, not for the commendations. For moments like this, where a little girl could finally close her eyes without fear. For the first time in days, the knot in his shoulders began to ease. The weeks after the rescue unfolded slowly, like snowmelt trickling through the pines. Winter still lingered over Bend, but inside Claire Harper's new apartment, there was warmth. Not just from the small electric heater in the corner, but from the way Sophie's laughter now filled the rooms. Ethan stood in the doorway one Saturday morning, watching mother and daughter unpack the last of the boxes. The place was modest. 2 bedrooms, a worn but solid oak table in the kitchen, a view of Pilot Butte Park from the living room window. But to Claire, it was a fortress compared to the nightmare they'd left behind. Ranger padded across the carpet, his bandaged side now free, the fur already growing back. He dropped a slobbery tennis ball at Sophie's feet, earning a giggle. "Again?" she teased, tossing it down the hallway. Ranger bounded after it, nails clicking against the hardwood. Claire glanced over her shoulder at Ethan. "You didn't have to do all this. The deposit, the furniture." "I wanted to," Ethan said simply. "A safe place is the first step. Everything else comes after." She didn't argue, but the gratitude in her eyes was clear. As the days passed, Ethan found reasons to stop by. Sometimes it was to fix a leaky faucet or replace a stubborn light switch. Other times it was just to bring donuts from the bakery on Newport Avenue and sit at the table while Sophie chattered about school. One breezy afternoon, Ethan showed up with a kite, bright red, shaped like a hawk. "Ever flown one of these?" he asked Sophie. "Nope," she said, eyes wide. Pilot Butte Park stretched under a clear blue sky, the grass still damp from morning frost. Ethan helped Sophie unwind the string, his large hands guiding hers as the kite caught the wind and soared. Claire watched from a bench, her scarf pulled tight against the chill, smiling in a way that reached her eyes. Later that week, he brought over a small tool kit and spent the afternoon repairing the squeaky hinges on Sophie's bedroom door. When he was done, Sophie handed him a folded piece of paper. "I made this," she said shyly. Ethan opened it to find a crayon drawing. 4 stick figures, a woman with long brown hair, a man with broad shoulders, a little girl with a red dress, and a dog with pointed ears. Above them, in blocky letters, were the initials C plus E plus S plus R. Claire, Ethan, Sophie, Ranger. Ethan felt something in his chest shift. A quiet, unexpected weight settling in, not unwelcome. "Guess I'm part of the family now," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Sophie grinned. "You've been part of it since Highway 26. Ranger thumped his tail against the floor, as if seconding the motion. Ethan looked over at Claire, who met his gaze without looking away. There was no rush, no need for big declarations, just the steady understanding that sometimes family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build piece by piece until one day it feels like it's always been there. Spring came late to the high country, but when it did, it arrived all at once, in the soft green haze over the pines, in the snowmelt rushing down from the Cascade Peaks, and in the air that finally smelled of earth instead of frost. Ethan steered his truck along the winding road toward Sparks Lake, Ranger's head sticking out the rear window, ears flapping in the cool breeze. In the passenger seat, Sophie leaned forward, pointing excitedly at every glint of water through the trees. Claire sat beside her, the sunlight catching in her hair, her shoulders relaxed in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. They parked in a small gravel turnout and walked down to the lakeshore, where the glassy water mirrored the snow-capped Three Sisters in perfect stillness. Sophie kicked off her shoes without hesitation, running barefoot into the soft grass that lined the shore. Ranger bounded after her, barking in the high, playful tone he reserved for moments like this. Claire spread a blanket and unpacked a small picnic. Sandwiches, apples, and a mason jar of lemonade that glowed golden in the sun. Ethan dropped down beside her, watching Sophie chase Ranger in wide, looping circles. "You picked the right spot," Claire said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. "Thought you could both use a place with no walls, no locks, and no shadows." She smiled, small, but certain. "We have that now." After lunch, Sophie wandered to the water's edge with a stick, drawing shapes in the damp sand. When Ethan walked over, he saw she'd written a single word in big, uneven letters. Home. She looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "This is forever, right?" Ethan crouched beside her. Yeah, kiddo. This is forever. Ranger trotted over, pressing his damp nose into Ethan's hand as if to seal the promise. Claire joined them, her hand finding Ethan's without hesitation. For a long moment the three of them, and one steadfast dog, stood in the warm light, the mountains rising behind them like silent witnesses. In that quiet, Ethan thought about how it had all begun. A cold stretch of Highway 26, a barefoot child, 5 whispered words that turned his life into something unrecognizable and infinitely better. He hadn't gone looking for a family, but somehow, one had found him. As the sun dipped lower, the lake took on a copper glow. Sophie lay back in the grass, Ranger curling at her side, both of them watching the sky shift colors. Claire rested her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder. Funny thing about rescues, she murmured. Sometimes you don't know who's saving who. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already there, in the rhythm of Sophie's breathing, in the warmth of Claire's hand in his, and in the way Ranger's steady heartbeat matched his own. Over the Cascades, the light lingered long after sunset, holding the day in its gentle grip, as if it, too, knew this was a moment worth keeping. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Chapter 10. This journey, from a lonely stretch of Highway 26 to a home filled with laughter, has been about courage, second chances, and the unexpected ways we find family. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to join our little community here. Hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another story of hope, healing, and the moments that change everything. Here's to more stories. And to believing that sometimes, forever begins in the most unlikely places.